Your car guy here. Today we are putting the resistors in on a 2007 GMC Yukon Denali. We've switched the struts over from the active ride and the air struts with the active suspension control, and we're going to the passive struts. So now what we're going to do is we're going to install the resistors so that it doesn't put up the service suspension warning in the dash. Now on the front, on either side, we're going to have a wire connection right here that used to go into the top of the old strut. Now I leave the piece that was actually connected into the strut installed. The reason I'm doing that is to keep dust, dirt, and debris from getting in this wiring connection. Also leaving it there so if I ever decide to go back to the active suspension or somebody wants to, it's going to be plug and play. But we've got to install wiring resistors that connect these two wires that go into this harness together. And in order to do that and still leave it to where it's plug and play if we're going to go back, what we're going to do is we're going to strip off this cover right here so I can expose these two wires where I can see them, and we're going to connect our resistor back in here. That way, if we're ever going to go back with the active suspension, it's simply a matter of cutting out our resistor and plugging right back into our new strut. So it makes it very simple. You could take and cut these wires and then simply connect your resistor to the two wires if you never plan on going back. But in our case, you know, it's a possibility, and if for the next owner that has the vehicle, I like them to have that option. Okay, now in order to strip this open, a nice set of small side cutters works well, and we've got to get some of the electrical tape that they've used to wrap it up off. Sometimes it's easier to just get it peeled part way open and then you can cut it apart. If you can peel it off with your hands, that's always the best. What you don't want to do is get in here with a pocket knife and start cutting in a dangerous manner where you might cut your fingers. Because all we're really wanting to do is just get these wires exposed where it's easy to get to a midpoint on them. Now see, here's a nice midpoint that we can work with. If I finish taking this piece of electrical tape off, I'll actually be able to work with more of the wire. This is actually going to be important because as we get into sealing these back up with electrical tape, we want more room to work so we can run the roll of electrical tape all the way around to get them nice and secure. What we're not going to do is we're not going to cut all the way through the wire. Now if you accidentally do, it's not a big deal. You can strip it, reconnect it. But in this case, I'm going to show you how to do it without cutting through the wire and having to connect it that way. Stop it. Okay, what we're going to do is take a pair of wire strippers, and we're going to not actually strip back, but we're just going to cut open the insulation on this wiring. So we get it in there. Like I said, we don't want to cut the wire. We simply want to pull the insulation back and get the wire exposed where we can get to it. And I'll do this in two different spots, about half an inch apart, you know, enough to have a space to work in for me to get the wiring connection put together. So now that I've stripped back those two spots on the wire, you can see I have a section of wire that's free and loose. Now I can simply take and I will skin off the top side of that wire insulation, the wiring insulation. That way I can get to just the wire. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm going to take a knife and just gently, keeping it as flat of an angle as I can, expose the inner wiring here and just trim off in one place, or on one side I should say, and that way I will be able to take and just peel the wiring insulation off in that section. That'll give me access to put my new wire connection in without breaking this wire. We'll simply wrap in and tie it to it, then we're going to wrap it with electrical tape to insulate it. Alright, so here we're going to go ahead and put wiring on our resistors. I'm going to use a soldering iron. I have my rosin core solder, which is for electrical work. versus an acid core solder, which would be used for like repairing radiators or other things like that. I'm going to use a pair of wire strippers, and I've got 4 pieces of wire here. That's enough to do 2 resistors. Now I've got 4 resistors here, enough to do both the front and the rear. But I'll just show you how to put this together. So this wire's 7, maybe 8 inches long. We're going to strip the end back at about, give us enough wire that I can separate it and push it through the hole in the end of my resistor here. So what I like to do is separate my wiring into 2 parts. Then I'm going to wrap one of those together so it's easy to slide through the end of the hole here, or the hole in the end there. Now once it's through, I'm going to pull it about halfway through, bring my other end, twist them together, and then I'm going to spin my wire on the back end to twist the back side together. What this is doing is creating a nice connection here so that the solder, when I solder, it's not going to be the only thing holding it in place. So we now have it tied in there. Now if you don't have a soldering iron, you could actually just do this right here and tape it up, and you'll have a pretty good connection. But if you add the solder, that connection is going to last longer. So what we're going to do with our soldering iron, we're going to take our solder here, and we're just going to heat up the wire and just burn this solder right down in to make that connection. Now if you'll look, that solder has made a nice firm connection. I'm going to do both sides with the solder. Makes everything stay in place, keeps it nice and neat. It makes a really good electrical connection. We're going to come back later. We're going to insulate this with some electrical tape to keep it from touching anything when we put it in the vehicle. So there you can see we've got the one end soldered with a nice electrical connection. So we'll strip another wire to go on the other end. We're going to just repeat that exact same process. And we're going to do this on all 4 of these resistors. So we're going to go through the hole, about halfway through, twist the outside end together, and we're going to pull back on it and twist our inside end together, and a solid connection. Then the wire back over itself, and then we'll simply solder that connection into place. And we've got a nice connection. Now just go ahead and do that with all 4 of your resistors, or if you've only changed the front or just the rears, you can do 2 of your resistors, the 2 that you need for the end that you have converted to passive suspension. The resistors we're using came from Suncor with our kit when we bought our struts. You can see the stamping on there, HEL TMC-50 50 watt, which is a 6R 1%. Suncor M1549. When I check these with the ohm meter, they've got about an 8 ohms of resistance. I like that they do have plenty of size and thinned aluminum body for heat dissipation. And then the holes where you could either screw to whatever you're going to mount it to. I think in our case, we're probably going to zip tie it in place using some zip ties, but we can also use those holes to make sure that that's going to stay secure. Now we are going to solder our wiring onto both ends, as that will give us the best connection. We have a couple that we've already done here. I showed you earlier. We'll get this done. Okay, now that we've got both the wires exposed, we're going to take and kind of try to split the wiring right down the middle in order to create a little open hole here. that you can see through. Then we're going to take one of the wires that is attached to our resistor, put it through, and then twist it together to hold. Now as we twist it together, we'll push this hole back closed, and we're going to take these wires and wrap them opposite directions around the existing wire. As we do that, we have a nice firm connection here. Now if you want to, you can add solder here as well in order to firm up that connection. But wrapping them together, as long as they're wrapped nice and tight, will do the job. We're going to do the same thing onto our other wire in order to get a good solid connection. One through, tie it together, pull the wire back closed, and then simply wrap our wiring around it in opposite directions. By going opposite directions, it's kind of like braiding it together in a way that makes it stronger. Just like that. So we have our resistor tied into each wire. Now that we have our resistor wired in, we're going to go ahead and take electrical tape, and we're going to seal up our connections. We don't want water and corrosion getting in here, so we're just going to take our tape and we're going to run from one end to the other. The way I'll do this is I'll put these two wires so they're laying right together and run that tape around. Now this is why I undid the entire thing, so I can get my tape to fit through without having to cut these wires. So you just take your tape, run it all the way down from one end to the other to cover up this entire area that we have exposed. And then I like to go and run a second pass back to the top as well. Go well beyond by at least a piece of tape's width where you have your area stripped out and opened up. That'll just ensure you're trying to keep that moisture out. You're also trying to keep it from shorting out if it touches body ground, meaning any piece of metal on the chassis, the frame, the body, whatever it is that we may be near. Then we'll tie this up into place. Okay, now that we've got our two separate wires taped up, now what we're going to do is take the tape and run around the outside and just tie them together in order to keep this nice and neat and tidy in here. It also helps keep one of the wires from getting into anything and getting yanked out. The next part that we're going to look at is taking our resistor and mounting it somewhere up out of the way. What we want to do, we want to keep it away to where it's not bouncing, going to get caught in the steering or into our belt. But also, remember, this thing's going to get a little bit warm, so best to keep it off of plastic harnesses and stuff where it might melt through or vibration may cause it to rub through. In this case, we have enough wire, we can come up and tie it right here to our battery, or it looks like a battery tray, but there's a metal tray right here. And you can simply attach it with zip ties, or if you're feeling froggy, you could take and drill some holes and screw it right to that plate. In this case, we're just going to take some zip ties and zip tie it up. So we've got this mounted up and out of the way, got it zip tied to keep it from rubbing on anything, made sure that our wires are nice and secure where they're not going to rub anything. Now we're just going to do the same thing on the passenger side, and then we'll move to the rear. Okay, to access our rear wiring, we need to pull out this inner fender. In order to do that, you're going to have two screws at the back here, one inside, one up at the top of the fender well, 2, 3 here at the front. So these 3 here at the front. Then there's push tab here, and a locking tab right here. Once we remove all of those, we can simply move our inner fender out of the vehicle. Okay, with our inner fender out, we now have access to the wiring very easily underneath here. We're going to do the same thing we did on the front. We're going to open up this bit of loom, pull the wiring out of it, so that we have access to the wire to connect our resistor into. Okay, this shot from underneath the vehicle shows real well how we've opened up our split loom. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to expose a section of wire right here and right here, tie our resistor into it, wrap it back up with our electrical tape, and then secure it right to the air pump box. All right, here we are with our wires opened up, ready for us to tie in our set. And here we are with our resistor wiring tied in. Now we simply are going to insulate it, and then we'll secure our resistor. So here you can see the resistor secured to the air pump box. It's important to note that when you're doing this with your wiring, make sure that all of your wires are away from any sharp edges that they could rub on. Tie it up, secure it so that it's not just going to be flopping and bouncing back here, because if it is flopping and bouncing, it could rub on something, rub through, and short out. Now, underneath the passenger side, we went ahead and secured the resistor up on top of this carrier that mounts the spare tire. And that gave us access to have everything tied up nice and neat and out of the way. Now note that when doing this on the rears, you can do it without removing the inner fenders if you're willing to lay on the ground underneath the vehicle and work in that manner. Now that we have everything tied up, secured, we've closed the hood, we've put everything back in place, we have all our sensors nice and tight. Our service suspension warning indicator on the dash is gone. So, not too bad of a fix. You will find that the passenger side front is a little more difficult to get access to, but just take your time and be patient as you get it done, and you'll be fine. This is your car guy. Don't forget to like and share, and please help us grow the channel. If you have any questions, always shoot me a note.